The idea of having a small physical space, or I suppose it could be a large physical space, but for most people who don't have the resources, some small pre-designated physical space that represents a safe zone, and creating, or I should say populating that safe zone with things, as you said, as a visual neuroscientist originally, I guess now I study stress, but as a visual neuroscientist, we know that photographs are extremely powerful cues for the memory system, especially actual physical photographs. And I believe there is some work on this, that if people keep a photograph of something that draws positive memories, that photograph actually, they keep it with them, that actually can be a positive cue for alleviating stress and just enhancing mood. This is probably done less so nowadays because everyone keeps things on their phones and it's just kind of a scroll through. But in any event, when we talk about stress, it's clear that there's short-term, medium-term, long-term stress. You studied all these different forms of stress. If you would be so kind as to just give us an overview of the different forms of stress, how we can learn to recognize those. And then I'd love to transition from there into talking about some of the work that you've been doing on stress and stress-related eating, and stress and how it relates to aging in particular. But before we do that, make sure everyone's on the same page, if you could just pepper our minds with knowledge about stress in all its beautiful and not so beautiful forms.
So when we think about stress, we usually think feeling stress, reporting stress, and that's important. What our body is doing is also important, and it's not always related to our mind. So measuring levels of the nervous system and how vigilant we are is another way that we can understand stress. And that's particularly important and interesting because that's how stress gets under the skin, and we might not be aware. We might not report stress, but we're still holding tension and being much more sympathetically dominated, meaning that our body is vigilant and scanning for cues, and we don't feel safe. And so we're mobilizing a lot more energy than we need to. And stress is so expensive to the body. The stress response uses a tremendous amount of energy, ATP, that's made by our mitochondria. And if we have that kind of vigilant stress response on all day, we're just going to feel exhausted. And we all feel exhausted at this stage of the kind of long shadow of the pandemic. And it's really no mystery because we're not good at turning the stress response off. And that's what we want to really focus on, is understanding we need to mount a big stress response to cope with things when we need extra energy. But then we can actually let our body relax and we can turn it off. And that's where the rumination comes in. We want to catch ourselves rehearsing and reliving stress or worrying about the next thing and saying, right now, I'm safe. And, there's the breathing strategies. I'm right with you, where those are the most direct and fast path to reducing stress in the body, period.
Yeah, our colleague, David Spiegel, our associate chair of psychiatry at Stanford and also a colleague of yours as well, has, I think, said it best, which is that breathing is unique among the functions of the brain, because it really originates as a brain function and then extends, of course, to the body, in that it represents a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. Because at any given moment, we're breathing. And of course, at any given moment, we can take control of our breathing. There are very few brain circuits that impact the body in that way. Like I can't suddenly just change my rate of digestion because I decide to, but we can do that with breathing. We will definitely get into some of the work that you've been doing on breath work in particular. I know you have a study that's actually explored the Wim Hof method quite directly. One of the few studies that I'm aware of that's done that. So we'll get to that a little bit later. So you describe stress as a way that the body and mind mobilize energy.
Yeah. And I didn't quite answer your question. So there's that acute stress response when every hormone and cell in our body is having a stress response. And that is allowing us to reorient, focus, problem solve. It's really beautiful how much we can increase our capacity to do things during stress. And then if it, lasts minutes or hours, we eventually recover. And that is what happens all day in small, to small extents with daily stressors. We don't necessarily get so threatened that we release a lot of cortisol, but our nervous system is going up and down all day. Then there's kind of moderate stressful events that maybe take days or months to cope with. And what's important there is that noticing, like right now, am I really coping acutely with something, or can I restore? So that kind of daily restoration is very important. And then there are chronically stressful situations that go on for years. Many of us, not all of us, but many of us have those in our life. These are situations, I'll just use caregiving as an example, that we can't change. We can't change other people. We can't change certain situations or resources. And we can be thinking about them, chronically problem solving, trying to wish things were different, or we can use acceptance, radical acceptance strategies and other strategies to live well with them. And so that's a really important strategy for people who feel like their life is going to be stressful forever because of X or Y. That's not true. You have a harder life. You're going to do more coping, but you can actually be dealing with uncontrollable chronic stress in ways that it's not going to take that toll on your body. I mean, I study chronic stress and how it accelerates cell aging, and I can tell you there's so much variance between people. People are so different. So among caregivers, some of them look as biologically young or younger than our controls, people with no identifiable big, tough situation in their life.
I love to hear about the